Hello, welcome. I'm Shannon Sclafani, head of the Michigan District Council of the Urban Land Institute. On behalf of ULI, I'd like to welcome you to this virtual meeting and express how much we hope that you are all well and safe during this unprecedented time. I hope that this call goes smoothly, but also hope that you will forgive us any hiccups that may occur as we learn how to use this technology in a more expanded capacity than we have ever before. We've already set the default for all of you to be muted for the majority of this meeting, and we ask that you also disable your video for the duration of the presentation in order to ensure that we have proper bandwidth. This meeting's presentation is being recorded, and we will share the presentation on our website soon after. In just a few moments, I'll turn it over to our speakers to start, but wanted to share the format of this meeting to ensure that we can maximize everyone's time. Victoria will be monitoring the chat for questions that you may have throughout the presentations, and we've reserved the last portion of this panel for a robust Q&A session with our speakers and with each other. Please allow for Victoria to call on you to unmute yourself so that you can repeat your question out loud during that time. Today, for the first time, we will also be offering breakout rooms when the panel concludes. If you'd like to discuss further in a small group format, simply stay on the line when the panel concludes, and we will assign you into breakout rooms to continue the discussion. With that, we're going to get started. And we're focusing today on trying to sort through and discuss all of the different ways that going back to the office, reopening businesses, and getting back to sort of business as unusual is going to happen. We've got a myriad of speakers ranging anywhere from co-working spaces to public spaces, commercial tenant, commercial office and retail tenants. We've got software solutions, and we've got design solutions for what will be the new office space. We're going to start today with Mindy Lopez. Mindy is the Director of Collaborative Workspace at TechTown Detroit. To get it kicked off for us, each of the speakers will give a brief introduction to themselves, and then we will kick into a healthy fireside chat. So Mindy, welcome, and feel free to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Shannon. Hi, everybody. I am Mindy Lopez, and I'm the Director of Collaborative Workspace for TechTown in Detroit. What that means is that I'm responsible for all of the member and tenant co-working and leasing of the building, as well as all customer service support and our full event space. So I have been with TechTown for a little bit more than a year and put together a safe space plan for the kickoff of, well, actually for exiting the building for COVID when coronavirus hit, and have also put together a plan to reopen the building, which we did on July 15th. I don't know if you'd like me to share more or...
I'd love for you to share some of the protocols that you've put into place at TechTown, Mindy.
Absolutely. When we initially closed the building, we put a multi-step plan in place. Once we were able to open the building on July 15th, or excuse me, June 15th, we had put in place everything from new membership and office options for our coworkers and tenants, to one-way directional signs throughout the building, temperature monitoring stations both at the front of the building and in our delivery areas. We've put in place Zoom rooms for some of our conference rooms, social distancing throughout the building. We have changed our food options within the building from in-house food options to food truck options for our members and tenants. Our co-working space, we have utilized some of our event spaces so that we could space out our coworkers, so everybody has actually about 10 feet in between them. We also installed, where our dedicated desks are, we installed plexiglass, almost mini offices around the dedicated desks, and pretty much have put in place as much as we possibly can to protect our coworkers, our members, our guests, and our employees. We did upgrade our HVAC system with HEPA filters that collect most of the bad stuff. We also are requiring masks in the building. And we have in place a COVID supervisor who is responsible for monitoring any type of potential issues. And the final thing that we put in place, we replaced all of our exterior and interior door systems with a system that monitors people in and out of the building. And in our first phase of opening, we are opening without events and without guests in the building, and also have limited hours. Our normal hours are 24/7 for our members and tenants, but we are a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday office for right now. So we have scaled back dramatically, but it seems to be working, and we're happy to have most of our tenants back and our coworkers trickling in. And I think that they seem to be pretty pleased with the support services that we've put in place as well.
Thanks, Mindy. Quick question, is there anything that you put into place or plan to put into place that that you quickly realized wasn't the right solution or wasn't working, that you had to adapt?
So far, no. One of the things that we did initially, we got a lot of requests to upgrade coworkers to small offices. So we did put in place a few additional changes where we turned our small conference rooms into temporary small offices. And I think that we didn't need to do quite as many as we did. But since we are not utilizing the small meeting rooms right now, it's fine, and we'll see kind of how things go. But I'm very pleased with the added security. Our security, the new door system that we put in place, we also put in place for our conference room doors. So that will enable us to be able to monitor our conference rooms a little bit better. As a event and meeting space and a co-working space, we quite often have a lot of people squatting in our conference rooms. So that can't happen so much anymore. You'll have dedicated hours that you can access it. So that's been pretty positive. I think one of the other things that we did was we removed all of our soft furniture. So anything that had cloth seating, we replaced with furniture that was easily cleanable. So I think we're in pretty good shape with that.
Wonderful, thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Up next, we're going to hear from Sam Hamburger. Sam is the Vice President of Acquisitions and Leasing at Bedrock Detroit. And we'd love to hear from you, Sam, about sort of your plan as a property owner and how you're getting people back into their office and retail spaces, and what the role is of the property owner versus the tenants, and how you're treating all of your shared spaces. So take it away.
Thanks, Shannon. As Shannon mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Acquisitions and Leasing at Bedrock, based in downtown Detroit. I've been with the company for just over 8 years, started early on focusing primarily on acquisitions, and then about 6-7 months ago, shifted focus, still working on acquisitions, but shifted focus over to leasing as well, just in time to take on all of what we've seen over the last 6-7 months, which has definitely brought with it challenges, but definitely great learning experiences as well, that we can take with us moving forward. So on the leasing side, a lot of you may have seen, especially plugged into the ULI community, that we started off, tried to be proactive in offering 2 to 3 months of rent abatement for almost all of our retail and restaurant tenants, specifically focusing on the small businesses who did get 3 months of rent abatement. And more recently, towards the end of May, as we started to see that this wasn't going to blow over as quickly as anybody would have hoped, and really started to understand the lasting impacts of mandatory business closures and clearly a drop in consumer confidence and demand as office workers were not coming downtown every day. We initiated phase 2 of our rent relief program, which instituted a 7% percentage rent variable rental structure for tenants that qualify through the end of the year. So I think at the end of the day, we acknowledge that, you know, the short-term impacts are obviously very tough for a lot of tenants and small businesses to deal with, but there will definitely be lasting impacts on not only small businesses, but businesses of all sizes on the retail and office side for that matter. So, you know, it's really been a major team effort at Bedrock. So much of our focus has been on trying to keep our tenants afloat from a small business standpoint, and really to understand their circumstances so we can do whatever we can to help. In terms of bringing office tenants back to work, it's something we've been monitoring very closely. As I mentioned, you know, of the 85,000 team members and employees that are downtown on any given day, we're probably looking at anywhere between 5 to 10% of those in recent weeks. That will obviously and hopefully increase as time moves on and, you know, restrictions get lifted. But if you think about the perspective of a small business owner with a fraction of your target audience downtown on a daily basis, it can be a major challenge. So we're working very closely with our office tenants and some of the tenants that we're affiliated with to understand their plans to come back to the office. And I think really the underlying theme in all of those conversations is it's tough to make decisions with so much uncertainty. And I've seen that, you know, throughout all aspects of our business, in real estate specifically, from underwriting to valuing properties to financing to leasing. There really has been obviously a broad impact across the board. And when we think about kind of operationally and logistically bringing tenants back to work, we're putting out playbooks. We're focusing on really controlling our common areas and letting tenants take care of how they operate within their spaces. So, you know, any one of our buildings that you walk into, it's very important to us. And in a lot of cases, it's mandated by the state that we have clear and transparent signage. You know, communication with our tenants is extremely important during these times because things are changing so quickly. And so we really are trying to adapt and be flexible and really kind of take all of this on with open eyes to make sure we can react as quickly as possible in accommodating our tenants.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Yep.
If there's one thing that Bedrock is known for, it's their ability to be nimble and do things quickly. So I appreciate that. Up next, we've got Mark Miller. Mark is a managing director of planning and design for Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc. Mark, I'd love to hear about what you guys are planning for public spaces, how you're helping the retailers, and just really focusing on sort of the public downtown atmosphere in Grand Rapids.
Thanks. Yeah, so we've been working for about 2 months on deploying space, creating more space for a lot of our restaurants and bar owners downtown as they started their reopening process. And it's been an up and down, somewhat shaky process. I think that this idea of, as Sam mentions, making decisions within this uncertainty is where we all are, depending upon what scale we're working in. It's present everywhere. So I think some of the stuff that we were doing early on was just trying to get ahead of this a little bit and realizing that, okay, we were going to be opening some of these businesses, but they weren't going to have capacity. After we talked to them at length for about a month, we realized that one of the things that we could give them was more capacity, more space. That was something that then we moved into creating stuff that we could move outside. And so what we've done throughout the city, but specifically in downtown at this point, is create what we call social zones. The city commission created the policy, and then we worked with the city as an entity to begin to deploy some of that stuff. And I think it's made a difference up to this point, although again, things are shaky and we have people opening and then closing and then opening again. So we're sort of up and down with a lot of this stuff. But it's one of those things where you realize, well, this is what we can give you at this moment. We're building a bridge. We're not quite sure where that bridge is going, but it's just a matter of like trying to help out these businesses, because as we tell people, without the businesses downtown, we really don't have a downtown. So I've got a couple of slides or just some images that I'd like to show you, if you could advance to the first one, that I think really begin to help show what we're doing here and maybe convey some of these ideas. So the one on the top is on Sheldon Avenue next to a bar called the Apartment Lounge and the Grand Rapids Children's Museum. And what we did was we just took some of the angled parking there and turned it into seating for that bar. And this is important in the sense that we deployed this in less than 24 hours. In fact, I was out on July 3rd helping our ambassador team and the owner of this bar deploy these things to get that seating. And it all transpired really because of the governor's order to close down bars the week before. So he was in a panic, needed to figure out what he could do. We had already permitted this area with the city, and so we just deployed this thing, and it was used, and it's being used almost nightly for him at this point in time. And those are all of our tables as well that we purchased in advance. We bought tables about 2 to 3 months ago in anticipation of this. We deployed about 200 tables and 700 chairs throughout this process. And then the one on Hartside is a little bit more robust because we actually had to drop in concrete barriers. We brought in 150 concrete barriers into downtown one Friday afternoon about 3 weeks ago, and began to close parts of streets to carve out space for these seating areas. So this one actually is 2 blocks of Ionia Street, just south of Fulton Street, near our arena. And then the next slide is probably actually some of the best, so far best deployment that we have. This is on our near west side on Bridge Street. And again, we closed about half of the street, kept through movement on the street because it's an important arterial into our city. And then what happened on this one is exactly what we had hoped for, is that we've dropped in the concrete barriers, created the space, and within days, these business owners put out their own seats, brought in landscape and planters, brought in umbrellas, brought in string lights, and really turned this into what we think of as a people space. So we've basically transitioned our streets that are primarily single-use automobile traffic into spaces that are used by people, which I think is one of our mandates even prior to the COVID crisis. So this has just been able to be more of a rapid kind of deployment. And I think that the key thing for us at this point in time is trying to keep these things adaptable, keeping them quick as possible so that we can make changes to them as the business needs change, or as the business owners themselves sort of come up with a better solution to whatever problems that they need to address. So I think that we're really monitoring these things almost on a daily basis. Last Tuesday, we moved about 17 of the concrete barriers from one spot in our city to another spot, just to address some business concerns that were happening in one of the areas. So we remain steadfast in terms of like moving these things through, and actually now are working to figure out what we do with the state laws that were just passed in terms of social districts and common areas for the expansion of drinking opportunities within some of our downtown. And that's pretty much all I got. unless there are some other comments.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Yeah.
I am quickly curious, if you are setting up and sort of maintaining all of these spaces, who is ultimately sort of responsible for deciding, you know, if something needs to sort of shut down or change?
It's a collaborative effort between our staff of about, we've got about 2 or 3 people working on this daily, where we're taking calls with the business community. And then it's the business community themselves and the city of Grand Rapids. So we typically are in constant contact daily with those 3 entities, sort of trying to balance these things. If there's an issue, we try to resolve the issue. Some of it is very basic things, like somebody needs more tables or less tables, and somebody else wants more tables, so we end up moving tables. Those are the easy things. In the case of the barriers, we had a business that decided it wasn't going to open until August, and we couldn't afford to leave the resource sitting there for a month or a month and a half. And then we had some other businesses that wanted to maintain some through traffic on a street that we had completely closed. So we just adapted the situation. And I mean, we have a great team of ambassadors that are part of our downtown improvement district, who go around basically keeping the downtown clean when we're in a non-crisis mode. And we've amped those efforts up quite a bit over the course of the last 3 months, where they are out doing a lot more cleaning efforts. We've installed sanitation stations with Perel hand sanitizer in many of these districts. They also deal with all the trash removal. So there's and they come out in the mornings and just make sure everything's clean. We oftentimes have them cleaning the tables and chairs so that we can maintain some of the sanitary conditions. But what we've noticed is that many of the business owners are doing that themselves. And some of that is just because the customers are demanding it, or because of their own protocols that already exist. So it's a really, I think the takeaway here is that we've had a really great collaboration, a really great team effort amongst various entities. And then one of the key takeaways for me, because I haven't really been in the public side of things for very long, is that we are moving very fast. So I appreciate the fact that we're able to implement in a period of 24 hours, or even in the case of most of this, a couple of weeks, because those are speeds that we're not used to working at. But we also need to be cognizant that we'll probably make mistakes as we move through those things, and then we'll fix those mistakes.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have Chris Hallendy. Chris is the CEO of Resolute Building Intelligence. Resolute is a software company that manages building solutions for commercial real estate. And so, Chris, I'd love to hear from you what sort of technology you guys are working on, what sort of technology sort of exists to help get people sort of back to work, comfortable, you know, confident that they're sort of in a sanitary environment. Let us know what you're seeing.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so as Shannon mentioned, Resolute, we're an analytics company. We take data out of a building, we do hopefully something very smart with it, and turn it into actions and answers of what's going on. But if you just think about technology, more broader level, there's kind of an old engineering mantra and adage around, if you can't measure something, you can't improve it. Or if you can't measure it, you can't prove it, right? There's a couple different takes on it. And I think even, when Mindy was talking about some of the stuff that they did around the security monitoring, again, it all boils down to, it ends up being about the data, right? If you have the data, you can answer a lot of questions, you can improve a lot of things, you can do stuff. And this could be a 4-hour panel about getting data out of a building and how do you create infrastructure to do so. And that's a whole nother issue. But I think what we're seeing from our customers, we're seeing from people that use our data and use other technologies out there, is trying to find those technologies to start supporting what you're doing. And one of the big drivers I think we see in this kind of middle post-COVID thing, or people coming back to work, is either with tenants or whether it is employees of a building. They're asking different questions now. So instead of, if I'm in this space, I'm worried about being hot or cold. I'm kind of cold right now, and I got to go tell somebody. But now the question is, am I safe? And well, what does that mean? And I think everyone on the panel has some great insights of, there's all these checklists coming out, ASHRAE's publishing stuff, the CDC's publishing stuff of, okay, here's things you can you do to make it safe, in the plexiglass and the temperature taking. And there's technologies that'll help with that, right? To scan people when they come in. And there's all these ways you can adopt the technology. But for us, it starts just thinking about the data in the building of, well, how many air exchanges do I have and where I'm sitting? What's the percentage of fresh air? Because I read somewhere or I saw something that it should be a certain percentage. Well, what does that mean? And you, as a building operator, a building owner, and kind of everyone that's touching it, if you can't answer that question, it's probably because you just don't have the data, right? And so what we're seeing is, I think there's kind of more resurgence on, it used to be a nice to have that data to do things, right? To make, capital improvements or to find out what's going on in the building. There's all these other reasons why the data is important, but now it's starting to trickle the line around, well, now people care a bit more about the CO2 levels that are in there, the parts per million. Like, again, Mindy, I think you talked about the HEPA filters. How do I prove that it's actually doing something from where I'm sitting? And it just kind of expands upon it. And obviously technology is moving. There's things that are constantly coming out. I think everyone is aware of a lot of apps and a lot of things around contact tracing and things that they're doing to just try to keep their arms around the pandemic. But then you can just think about inside the building, right? Things that you can do with people's phones and how can you track things. And now it becomes more of a social conversation. What are you willing to give up to feel safer, right? If I could say, oh, I got an app that will look at everyone's phone. As soon as you walk in the building, you don't even have to give me permission. I'm just I can know all about you and know everything so that I can protect you. And there's a fine line in that. And that becomes more of a social discussion of what is, what are people asking for? But I think the fundamental thing is that the questions are being asked around free, like I said, the how much outside air and what is my air exchange rate and am I safe from that kind of HVAC perspective? Well, you have to have the data to kind of prove it or disprove it.
Great, thanks so much, Chris. And last but not least, we've got Amy Warden. Amy Warden is the Corporate Workplace Practice Manager at Smith Group. Amy, we'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about either adapting current office spaces or designing new spaces that obviously are going to require a different sense of flow and trying to sort of control the way that people move throughout a space without making them feel controlled. What are you looking at? What are you seeing?
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Amy Warden, and I'm the Workplace Practice Manager for Smith Group, like Shannon mentioned. We are an integrated design firm with 15 offices across the country and China. So our brand promise is to design a better future. So while, a lot of us on the panel have been talking about the near term future right now, we are also focused on, once this pandemic dissipates, if we return to business as usual, we really feel like that's a missed opportunity. So we're making near term decisions with a keen focus on improving future outcomes. I think we can all agree that, the companies that learn from the challenges that this pandemic has ignited and can easily transition from office-based work to work from home modalities will come out ahead in the next, few years. But focusing a little bit on that post-pandemic workplace and what that looks like, the pandemic put a huge spotlight on remote work and whether or not it is effective. But it's making companies take an honest look at flexible work policies from here on out. So I believe, as somebody that's been in this market for a while, that we are about to embark on a paradigm shift in what constitutes as work across multiple industries and where that can be done. Employees have been vying for more flexible work policies for years. You can find, results or survey results and stats that confirm this notion. A few that stood out to me are International Workplace Group's 2019 studies stated that 77% of global businesses say they use flexible workplace policies to attract and retain top talent. And according to FlexJobs, 76% of workers say they would be more loyal to an employer if they had flexible work options. And then lastly, and a little bit more telling right now in July of 2020, Colliers recently came out with a study that said, post-pandemic, 70% of workers will want to continue to work from home at least one day a week. So what does all that do to, the future of workplace design and that office? At Smith Group, we talk a lot about designing the workplace as a tool for attraction and retention, engagement, culture, brand, all that stuff. And we also know that as humans, we thrive on relationships and the physical presence of one another. But all of these studies are showing us that the talent, AKA, the people and the company's greatest asset most of the time, want more flexibility. So the ones that are going to come out on top are the companies that develop a workplace ecosystem and can navigate how and where work-related activities are accomplished. But to do this successfully, the company needs to truly understand and define their why as it relates to in-office work. What are each company's main drivers? Is it connectivity and collaboration? Is it tools and technology? Is it culture? This is not a one-size-fits-all scenario, right? So the key here is understanding what adjustments will and will not align with your firm's mission, vision, values, et cetera, while also helping the company reach its business goals. So that's just a little bit of how we're approaching this and working within our own company and clients across the country.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I think that this first question I'd like to direct at Mindy and to Mark. When you're looking at these changes that you've put into place, are you viewing them as temporary? Is this a new form of best practices? Is this a protocol that you would, sort of have in place when a virus, sort of hits and you can quickly initiate it in the future? How are you sort of viewing the changes that you've made? And let's start with Mindy.
So thank you. That's a great question, because many of the changes that we've put in place are hopefully temporary measures, not knowing how long they're going to last. But because we put in a multi-phase plan, we're able to either move forward or backwards with the plan, and change some of the things in and out as we go. I would say that certainly the piece surrounding our security, the new door system, that's something that we'll be expanding through the building to include all of our tenant spaces, because it allows us better optimization for managing and rekey, not having to rekey or any of the above. So that we look at as a long-term investment. But definitely we'll pivot back and forth, depending on what happens with the outbreak. I mean, we certainly would like to be able to not have one-way traffic and not have one elevator go up and one elevator go down. But there are multiple things that we likely will have in place for a long time. But just our overall plan that we put in place, we certainly will be utilizing that as precedents for any future type of experiences.
Wonderful. Mark, how about you?
Well, I think that initially and even currently, these things are viewed as temporary installations. So we are planning them through whenever the weather doesn't allow us to do it anymore. But I think that this is an experiment in a way to see what happens when we start to rebalance some of our streets. And I think that that's been a goal of both the city of Grand Rapids and DGRI over the course of the last few years, where we can start to take where there's too many lanes or too wide of lanes, or even where we have parking where we might not need parking, and reallocate that to the various other things that might be important or using the street. And that includes the ever evolving and hard to pinpoint micromobility aspects of the various things that are being introduced into our cities across the country. And I think that the other interesting thing that's happened, again, across the country and even worldwide, is that these same kind of experiments are happening at different scales and for different reasons. There are places outside of the United States that are using their streets for classrooms. There are some places using their streets for retail operations, which we are willing to do as well. And I think that, so this brings a whole myriad of problems. I mean, one of them is basic, how do you get the trash picked up? How does the letter carrier deliver your mail? Where do I park? Which is always a question, whether it's COVID related or not. And I think so we have to balance some of those expectations with these other things. And I think what maybe some of the business owners are seeing, at least the ones who are a little bit ahead of this in terms of their deployment, is that this is actually making a difference to their financial bottom line, even in an environment that is stop and start and somewhat dicey. They're still seeing some positivity coming out of this. So I think the ultimate question will be, is there room to take this rebalancing and move it into some future state that we do take some space away from the automobile and convert it to use by other things or other people to sort of facilitate commerce, which is what cities have always been a part of. So I think that's going to be a fascinating thing as we sort of all move forward in our thinking about our public space and how public space is used as we get out of the post-COVID and maybe return to whatever we think of as normal in the future.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think after looking at those pictures, minus coronavirus, I think next summer people would be missing that atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's not something that looks like a sort of poor substitution or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an attraction.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, this next question I'd like to put toward Amy, and I'd like to put toward Sam. So we've talked a lot about the adaptation of existing space. How will this impact the way that you're approaching brand new projects in the future? So when you're talking about new retail tenants coming in, Sam, maybe you can answer this first, or office tenants, and you're white boxing things. How will you approach that differently versus adapting to the existing spaces for tenants that you already have?
So I think we've been lucky enough to see strong demand for office space in Detroit over the last decade, I'll say. And I think, some in the industry are anticipating companies needing less office space because you have less people in the office on a daily basis. But kind of on the flip side of that argument, anybody who is in the office will actually need more square footage per individual. And so what we've seen, and this is touches on your question, but it's more so in terms of what we are focusing on building as we kind of look forward, specifically in Detroit. The impact could potentially be net neutral. And I think some companies are trying to solve these potentially short-term issues with long-term solutions, and those long-term solutions might not fit for the long-term circumstance. And so, I've seen some companies look to either maybe they were building a hotel and they're going to convert to residential, or they're own a hotel and they're going to convert that hotel to residential. in my mind, you know, the investment in that type of transition might not provide the type of return if, let's say, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we're back to business as usual, and you know, there's still a significant demand for hotel keys in whatever market we're referring to. I do think, and Amy, you touched on this, and maybe you'll touch on it again, but when you think about office design and, you know, amenities within an office building, I think focus on, you know, group spaces. A lot of those, I think, will focus on outdoor group spaces. A lot of companies are starting to focus on kind of the WELL accreditation, which is, you know, one more part of your sales pitch, combined with new technology that you could incorporate into your office buildings to separate yourself from other landlords from a leasing standpoint. At the end of the day, I think while office design within the outer four walls of a given space or building will change in the short term, as Amy alluded to, I think the outer four walls personally won't change too much. That's my perspective. I think, you know, hopefully, I think in the next few years, things will go back to, you know, will trend towards normalcy. And I think, you know, human nature and we as humans have very short-term kind of memories. And so, you know, hopefully in the next 3, 4, 5 years, this will be something we can all talk about and bond over, but kind of continue to focus on where things will go.
Or we'll all still be wearing masks. They'll just have
Who
gotten
knows?
technological.
That is equally as possible.
Amy, what about you? If you're starting with a blank slate, how is this changing the way that you would start designing a new space?
Well, I think it just goes back to, you know, that notion that I talked about earlier is what does your company need the office to do for them, right? I had a call the other day with our higher education market strategist, and he was talking about, you know, how are they working with college and universities right now? Because, you know, they're in a similar situation trying to solve this actively. And they talked about, you know, coming up with action-oriented program. And, you know, that got me thinking, like, how does that translate to the office? So I think in the last several years, we've seen a shift from, you know, rows and rows of bench seating to more activity-based workplaces that give the employee, you know, the autonomy and the choice to pick the work setting that is most conducive to their task at hand, right? But at the same time, if you're going to go down this, you know, flexible blended work environment at your company, and you've created, you know, a whole section of your office for heads down work or quiet zones that nobody's supposed to talk or bother you, and all that sort of heads down work can be done at home now, you know, what does that free up the office to? And then also, you know, more of a nod to Chris from the technology point of view, but making sure that things are set up for future success. And we talk a lot about, you know, equitable collaboration for those that are going to need to remain remote workers for quite some time if they're taking care of somebody in a vulnerable population, or they are a vulnerable population themselves. You know, the company has to make a concerted effort to not make it, you know, the haves versus the have-nots, or the people in the office are part of these conversations and the other people aren't. So.
Great, thank you.
And Shannon, real quick, one more point too. I think, you know, when I think about our portfolio in Detroit and also Cleveland, I think cities like those in the Midwest or those that might typically be considered, you know, second tier or tertiary cities, I think on the whole, they will be uniquely positioned to capture some of those larger corporate tenants who may be in New York, San Francisco, LA, Boston, who, you know, going into the next few years are going to be looking at their expenses and kind of seeing these secondary markets as great opportunities for people where they can still live close to work, but live less expensively. I think this whole situation will put the highlight on cities like, you know, Detroit, Grand Rapids, Cleveland, and others in the market.
And that access, you know, that greater talent pool is a game changer for everyone.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm gonna shift over to some of the questions that are in the chat. Olga, would you like to unmute yourself to ask your question, or do you want me to read it for you? I'll give you a
No,
little.
I'm happy to unmute myself. So my question was really more about just getting into the nuts and bolts of what's happening with small businesses on the ground and the types of really specific help that they're asking for when they're talking to their landlords or to district managers. You know, are they struggling with online sales? Are they struggling with how to do carry out? You know, what are the types of nitty gritty things that the tenants are asking for?
Mark, I think you would be a great person to start with that one.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that one of the benefits for me personally through all of this is that we've got to know our business owners a little bit better, especially over the course of the last two months. And so I think one of your questions about the online sales or sort of that digital interface is that what we have realized, and I think what many of our small business owners have realized, is that they just didn't have that. And the few that did actually thrived or did pretty good during our shutdown because they were able to sell their food in an online platform that was easy to use. So they were more like Amazon than many people probably wanted to admit. And I think that a vast majority of our local retailers are just not that technologically sophisticated. They haven't invested in that infrastructure. They don't have the apps. They don't have an easy way for somebody to order something from them. And so one of the things that we've toyed around with doing is actually providing support for to hire a web designer or an app designer to be able to provide them with that sort of interface. Because one of the things, I mean, I've listened to many people talk about this, and I think that what we're seeing is that maybe Amazon is morphing a tiny bit and becoming more like a brick and mortar kind of place, potentially, very small. But many of our local smaller scale businesses might be becoming more like Amazon in the way that they do that, have that ability to interface with people. So I think that's one of the fascinating things for us to sort of watch with some of our retailers and our restaurateurs. And then I think the other thing that we've seen is just, I mean, that shutdown was a killer. I mean, we have some folks who are on their last nickel, you know, they don't have any money in the bank account. They don't know how they're going to bring back their people. So we are in a very desperate sort of triage mode. And I think that some of the basic things that we're seeing that people need is you know, they don't want to deal with a permit. They don't want to deal with a permit fee. They can't deal with a permit fee. Time and money are essential because they need to be taking that and focusing it on how they're going to operate and open that business and keep that business moving. So some of it's really, really basic things. So anything that we can do, I think, to help those businesses and remove any kind of barriers that they might have in getting through this stuff, because they're struggling at many levels.
Thanks, Mark. Mindy, do you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to add something to that. It's, you know, we're at TechTown, we're kind of in an interesting position because in addition to the co-working and tenant space, we also are an economic development corporation focusing on entrepreneurs in the city of Detroit. And for my side of it, you know, the biggest thing as a landlord was relief, that people really needed relief during those months, which we were happily able to provide to them. But on our program side of it, with all of the small businesses that we're involved in, we really ramped up on the program side and pivoted to be able to help all of our entrepreneurs and retail businesses and small businesses through programming, either through our professional services network, where we can connect them with experts on certain topics to help them through things. You know, we also started a couple of funds to help small businesses out. But we, you know, relief is a big thing, but also being able to pivot and take all of our programs remotely so that we could help them specifically through these issues was a game changer for us.
Thanks so much, Mindy. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to that?
Yeah, I can be quick too. Olga, from a Bedrock standpoint, we kind of took a three-prong approach. First was rent relief, as Minty mentioned, along with kind of the variable rent structure that we put in place. We also, which I thought this was kind of a creative way to put cash in the hands of our small business owners, we gave them access to their security deposits and let them use that towards unforeseen reopening expenses. So if you're a yoga studio or a spinning studio, camera equipment, you know, glass or plexiglass dividers, things like that. If you're a restaurant, it could be PPE, could be outdoor furniture. So I thought that was something kind of interesting and creative we came up with. The second prong is driving traffic to these tenants, whether it's online or in person. Obviously, you know, subject to health and safety regulations. And that's through promotions, that's through activations, that's through working with Downtown Detroit Partnership and other entities downtown to close down streets, expand patios, et cetera. And then the third was focused on making sure our small business tenants have access to the resources and tools they need to apply for grants, to get PPE, because, you know, as Mark alluded to and said, this is the last thing they want to focus on. I mean, this is really a make or break situation for a lot of these small business owners. And so to take some of these things off of their plate, I think really does go a long way.
Thank you. Robin, I'm not sure that I could repeat your question and fully understand what you're looking for in an answer. Do you want to unmute yourself to ask it? Are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Simple question, very difficult. If 10% of offices don't come back, what are we going to do with 10% of the commercial space that we have in downtowns? Can we start to think about flexible space that changes the land use of our downtowns?
So his original question was asking about retrofitting into like the surplus office space into hybrid home workspace. I think that's going to have to be an Amy or Sam.
Yeah,
I think it's for Sam.
It's a yeah, that's a tough question. I think, you know, ultimately we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it. I think, you know, if I think about the long-term or medium-term impacts of something like this, hopefully it's not, you know, a significant reduction in office demand and tenants not renewing and companies going out of business. Not to say that's not a real possibility, especially in a down economy. I think, you know, converting the space to a different use would result in a significant investment, and maybe, you know, you try to build some continuity in floor plates in an office building, for example. And if we do conclude that, you know, maybe residential or condos is still a strong market, you can convert the top few floors of a building to residential or multifamily. Another vertical that we've started to look more into is industrial. And so, you know, obviously tough to incorporate an industrial use into an office or residential building, but whether it's data center space or storage, you know, hopefully we don't get there, but I think if we do, we'll be forced to get creative in terms of, you know, determining new ways to drive revenue to these buildings with significant vacancy. So unfortunately, no great answer to your question, but definitely an interesting one. Amy, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts there.
No, I was just going to say, you know, I think in my experience, those zoning changes really take a long time to come to
Yeah.
fruition. But in the residential market, I mean, we are seeing a lot more focus put on, you know, what workspaces are needed in there. So when this flexibility and, you know, pandemic phases come and go, that folks, particularly in multifamily residential, have, you know, those secondary spaces that can be used for office.
And Robin, actually, maybe a better answer to your question. I think what I've seen is that, you know, if you have a full open floor plate with a single tenant, let's say, and they go out, instead of building a co-working space, and Mindy touched on this too, going back to almost the Regis structure where you build a bunch of individual office or small office space or conference space that tenants in the building can either leverage for their own use, or individuals can come in and lease an office or two or three, where, you know, your office literally stands alone by itself, separate from everybody else. And maybe there are some shared amenities on that space that make it, you know, efficient to rent. But I think that is an option as well.
I would just respond to Amy and agree with her that one of the challenges coming out of this is the fact that maybe our sort of 5-year time to rezone downtowns is not going to fit any longer. That we do need to think more flexibly. We do need to think more responsively to the challenges. And then going back to August's point, small businesses rely upon this foot traffic, this constant movement of people that are coming in at all times of the day. And if we lose the traditional office space, we lose that breakfast traffic, the lunch traffic, the early evening traffic. You know, I think we've got to some extent, think differently about how we're going to use downtown space, because if people are going to stay at home, as we all are here, right? It's a different place.
Thanks, Robin.
That's my question.
It was a good
Absolutely.
You were getting some enthusiastic head nods from the panelists. So.
Okay, that's great. Good.
Manuel had a question, you know, about we know how we can mitigate against, you know, some of the risks, but how do we even think about mitigating against the asymptomatic carrier that doesn't have a temperature, for example? Mandy, I know you guys are monitoring that. They don't have symptoms.
It's about masks, and it's about sanitizing and washing your hands. I mean, we have a day porter that all he does is walk around and sanitize, and
right.
You know, all it's, you know, part of our plan was getting, you know, having, you know, when we announced our safe space plan, we had town halls with, you know, our members and tenants, and it was also about their participation. It can't just be left up to us. I mean, and it's about masks. So you have to do it. You have to sanitize.
Right. The social distancing is really intended to treat everybody as if they're
exactly
asymptomatic. So I've got one final question, and Kathleen had a comment and said, depending on how the zoning's written, live work can be a flexible enough term. So, so the final question that I wanted to ask, and I think I'm going to direct it to Chris first, and then see if anybody else has anything to add. But is there a technology that doesn't currently exist or is not readily accessible that you are looking for or would like to see in order to sort of implement all of these standards or make things better?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a technology. I mean, I think the technology's out there, you know, for whatever problem you're trying to solve, if it's a driverless car, if it's analytics in a building, like the technology's there. I think it's more of being a data evangelist and saying that you need the data. And then you can have conversations about how to get it. So instead of talking about maybe like what's the solution or the app that does it, it's more of how can I easily, without having a huge expense or having to do something, or as Amy kind of said, as you're planning out buildings, thinking a little bit more about that future of, well, how would we want this data? Because now you're going backwards to say, well, you know, how do you make the room safer? Well, you have these metrics, and it's pretty easy. If you have the metrics, we can do the numbers. I could tell you if you're safe, kind of on Manuel's question about the asymptomatic, the mask, the social distancing. Also, if the air is running properly and the pressurization is properly, you can be safer in a, you know, conference room, or if you're in your office that has a door or whatever, versus if you're in one office that shares a wall with someone else, but it's the same duct that it, you know, it doesn't matter what you have, you're just kind of recirculating that air. It's just it's getting that data. So I think the technologies around the 5G, the technologies around just making things easier, every control, everything that's being put into buildings now is far more advanced, you know, with technology kind of baked in. The more people are kind of conscious of that as they're doing things, it'll be easier, because it's always the question later. Well, if we had the data, I could do all this. It's not about the doing; it's about kind of the collecting. So I've become that term of the data evangelist for yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Does anybody else have thoughts on that? Anything they'd like to add?
I would just add for us, you know, as a architecture and engineering firm, mainly it's about connecting the data points, like Chris is saying. You know, the data exists, but it's all in disparate places and disparate hands. And the only way, you know, we're going to learn and grow is sharing that.
One more thing on my end too, I would say getting back to small businesses and keeping them successful. I think lowering the barrier, not only for them to kind of sustain operations, but for them to bring customers to their given location, because, you know, it takes a lot to leave your house these days. And so if you could look at, you know, some software or an app on your phone that said, you know, this store, this restaurant is not yet at capacity, and basically providing additional information to the consumer so they can make decisions with a little bit more lead time than you would just popping in and out to a store or restaurant. I think that would be helpful in kind of driving traffic to small businesses in a time where people are, you know, weary of leaving their house in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's driven to a Costco or Sam's Club, but I've went into the parking lot and turned around when I saw
Right, you're waiting in line.
I was like, oh, hell no. There's nothing in there that important.
Yeah, kind of to touch on what Amy said about the disparate data sources, regardless of real estate and buildings. I mean, just as people, we all have watches that are smarter. We have phones that are smarter. We have cars that are smarter. They're all capturing data. I mean, the watch on my wrist shows me my pulse ox. Didn't really care about that as much now. Well, now it's a pretty big indicator of things. If you guys have followed golf at the PGA, some of the PGA professionals that tested positive for COVID actually were alerted by a Whoop device that's on their wrist that they sponsor, because it said, oh, you're breathing, you know, you breathed less this night, or was elevated. You should probably, you know, maybe have a cold or an infection. And so connecting all those things, where that can connect to your phone, that can connect to the doctor, or all those things bubble up into a security system as you scan the badge, and, you know, to get into the office, and it says, hold on, your devices didn't pass the test, right? And then it pops up the tele health on your phone, and you got the doctor to talk to, right? Or you start breathing into the phone. I mean, these are the things that, it's all very possible. It's all right there, but it's the connecting, and then it's all that kind of the stuff that kind of gets in the way. Those are the barriers.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much. I think that concludes the panel portion. I am so appreciative of everybody and all of the work that you're doing. It's inspiring, and it's also just really, really great to hear from all of you. I appreciate the time that you've been able to give us today. For those of you that would like to continue the conversation, we're going to give you about 60 seconds, and then Victoria is going to put into breakout rooms. So all you need to do is stay on the line, and Victoria will put you into breakout rooms. For those of you that will not be continuing the discussion with us today, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about industrial development and how it impacts supply chain management, and the opportunities that are existing within that realm. So I look forward to seeing all of you again in 2 weeks. And until then, stay healthy.